Metro on 1019 WDET-FM Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham, and happy Canada Day. Jazz music can be described as improvised music at the highest level of artistry. Born in the segregated South by Black musicians, the genre has spread to Detroit and across the globe. But the love we have for jazz doesn't just stop in the city. It extends across the Detroit River. Windsor has been instrumental with helping jazz artists grow. Hugh Leal is a musician and longtime jazz lover from Windsor. In 1976, as an independent event coordinator, he gathered as many surviving musicians from the 1920s jazz age to perform in his city. Since then, the jazz musician has continued organizing jazz events, and in 2022, he helped form the Windsor Jazz Concert Series nonprofit. Joining us now to discuss his jazz events and the upcoming Port Windsor Jazz and Arts Festival on July 6th is the man of the hour himself, Hugh Leal. Hugh, welcome to the Metro.
Tia, thank you very much, and I really appreciate that Happy Canada Day thought. It's our big holiday. It's our version of like your 4th of July, so it's a big day here. We have the day off.
Yay for that, and thank you for taking time on your day off to speak with us on the Metro. And just speaking of Canada Day, talk a little bit about what's going on today across the river.
Well, the city has a big parade this morning, and there's lots of events. You know, we have a great waterfront in Windsor, and there's family-oriented rides and carnival and things like that. And there's celebrations around the city just marking the holiday and Canada's very special day.
Yeah. So Hugh, let's dive into this year's Port Windsor Jazz and Arts Festival. How long have you been curating jazz events in the Windsor area?
Well, I started in 1976. I was an independent promoter, producer, and my wife, Kathy, has been a great help. She let me do all these things where we take the risk of hiring some of the musicians, mainly from New York and Chicago, and a lot of Detroiters, too. And we thought that people in Windsor would like to hear these really established jazz greats. And we brought them at first to a few bars in Windsor for a couple of years, and the turnouts were good. We do about 4 or 5 concerts a year. And after a couple of years of this, we moved to the University of Windsor Music School, their recital hall. And over the years, we've had these concerts, the same thing, 4 or 5 a year, at virtually all the major stages of Windsor, the Capitol Theater and the Art Gallery and what used to be the Cleary Auditorium. So we've currently our home since 11 is a beautiful Mackenzie Hall. It's the city's cultural center out in the West End in historic old sandwich town, and it's an 1856 courthouse, beautiful Scottish stone masonry, and it's been converted into a city cultural center. We have a nice 200-seat room with a beautiful Yamaha concert grand piano. And for our festival, we're using a beautiful little parquet that's right next to this old Mackenzie Hall Center. So that's
Hugh,
where we're operating.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to ask you more about the area in general, because it just, from the pictures alone, I would love for our audiences to have a description of what it looks like, because once again, it's right across the river. You can literally stand on Detroit's river in Detroit and look across. So, you know, it's important that we do bring that to our visitors, our listeners, actually. But I do want to stick to talking a little bit about just your experiences with jazz within Windsor itself, because as you're talking, you wanted to make sure that people were able to experience all of the beautiful artistry that is jazz music with the musicians as well. So could you talk a little bit about, you know, Windsor and connecting Windsor with jazz?
Well, Windsor's in a really unique position of any city in Canada because we're 1 mile away from one of the world's great music cities, and that's your home, Detroit. So all of our efforts from day one and right up to this weekend's festival have really been built on and been successful because we have had access and continue to have this great pool of Detroit jazz talent. All these name players that we've brought from, as I mentioned, New Orleans, New York, Chicago, etc., Toronto, we've generally always just brought great solo name players and had them backed up mainly by Detroit musicians. That's what's made it possible. In our festival, we want to also showcase, we've got a lot of good Windsor musicians. There's been a renaissance the last 8 or 9 years with some young guys and gals in Windsor, young musicians in their 20s taking up jazz and doing a great job of playing it very well. There's a jazz program at the University of Windsor School of Creative Arts. So it's all coming together to allow this festival.
Yeah, which is such a beautiful thing to think about because, I'm assuming, I don't want to assume too much, but I'm assuming, when you started in 1976 that you honestly probably didn't expect to see it grow as in the way that it did, jazz music and the scene within Windsor in the way it has.
Well, I had no idea that it would come up. Now this is, our 49th year. We have plans for another season this fall and in the next year, and we're going to next season celebrate 50 years of jazz concerts in Windsor. So I had no idea back in '76, but the response was good. The first few concerts we featured some, as I said, Detroit players. There was some of the old-time greats from Count Basie's band, like Candy Johnson was still around, played with Basie's band, and the great Dave Wilborn, a singer that goes right back to the great black big band that really innovated music in the 20s in Detroit. The McKinney's Cotton Pickers, Dave Wilborn was around. We featured him. We had the Smithsonian, at the time, recent recording artist for the Smithsonian, Dr. James DePogny from U of M, and he had made these recordings of Jelly Roll Morton's from transcriptions he created. So we had all this great talent to start, and then from there, the next year, we started bringing some musicians from New York. I had the great trombonist Vic Dickinson, again, a great Basie player. Another great Basie player was Buddy Tate, one of the legendary Texas tenors, they used to call him. We had Wild Bill Davison, one of the early hot jazz cornet players going back to the 20s. So that it all started back then, and we always kept having paying audiences. The tickets we've tried to keep reasonable, and here we are almost 50 years later, still finding we have a ticket-supported audience, and now we have the nonprofits and have some sponsors that have helped tremendously, and that's allowing this free festival.
Hugh, so just hearing you talk about just all the amazing artists that you've been able to bring, especially since 1976 to where we are today, I do want to throw to a clip of the Speakeasy Quartet that performed at the festival back in 2013.
Wow.
Just listening to this music, it makes me wonder what it was like for you connecting with musicians from the 1920s jazz golden age. A lot of what we know from jazz or see from jazz, our minds instantly go back to that era. So can you talk about just being around and surrounded by those type of musicians, especially from the 1920s?
It's very thrilling to me. It remains, I've been very fortunate to, have done some things that are very gratifying, touring with Marcus Belgrave and Dave Bennett and playing it with the Detroit Symphony and at Carnegie Hall, and those were all great things. But one of the things that remains with me is my experiences with the 20s artists. I had some people I worked with quite closely. My concerts let me evolve into a record label called Parkwood Records. And I made some early recordings back in the early 80s of Doc Cheatham, who eventually, the great trumpeter from Cab Calloway's band, etc., he went on to win a Grammy. But I made one of his earliest feature recordings back in the early 80s, and he was great to be around. Art Hodes, the great Chicago hot jazz pianist and blues specialist, he was great. Franz Jackson from Chicago, great tenor player. Locally, I was just it's so thrilling to be around and present and record Detroit's J.C. Hurd, one of the absolutely all-time greats of swing drumming. J.C. was one of the early guys to move the beat and the cymbal sound and the way you swing rhythm. He was one of the early innovators of that movement to bring in the swing feel to jazz. And J.C. was just such a joy to be around. And, oh, man, it was so much fun. I had another favorite. A couple times we brought in Barrett Deems, a fantastic drummer who for many years was Louis Armstrong's drummer with the All-Stars in the 50s. You see him in that movie High Society with Louis and Frank Sinatra and Grace Kelly and Bing Crosby. That was fun to be around Barrett Deems. Oh, man.
You have a history book in your brain.
Well, it's my passion, and I'll tell you, it was really a program on public radio in Detroit, Jazz Yesterday, and the late Dave Hudson was the DJ there, and he was the one that led the revitalization band of the McKinney's Cotton Pickers band in the early 70s. He found the charts and got that band going, but he had a program on Detroit Public Radio, and he lent me a whole bunch of classic jazz records, and that was my main education to learn about the early greats and the early jazz records that are, classic recordings. So WDET, and then later I used to go on when I had some of these great old players like Sammy Price and Bud Freeman, the early 1920s saxophone innovator. I used to go on with Jim Gallert in the Jazz Yesterday program after he inherited it from Dave Hudson. So I have a connection there to the studio when it was up on the old top of the Maccabees building.
Yeah, which everyone reminds me of so often, that WDET had so many great people and just memories from the Maccabee building. But we are talking about the deep history of jazz in Windsor, and this year's Port Windsor Jazz and Arts Festival. Our guest is Hugh Leal, the organizer of the festival, longtime musician as well. Now, Hugh, I do for a moment want to take our conversation back, as far back as we can go, 1856 to be exact. The City of Windsor Cultural Center, Mackenzie Hall and Park. You talked about it, and you talked about the importance of it. What is the history of the site and the significance of it?
Well, it was this old courthouse that was going to be abandoned in the early 80s, but a citizens group saved it, and the city did a wonderful job of converting it into a multi-purpose art center. And it's a beautiful old Scottish building, Scottish stone, and the designer, the builder of it, was the second Prime Minister of Canada. I think it was Alexander Mackenzie. And so now this structure, building, and the park next door has remained an important cultural center for Windsor. I really have to thank our city here. They have set up a few years ago under the direction of Christopher Menard, what they call the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Fund. And a grant from them is helping us do this festival at the city's cultural center. So it's really nice to work with. We've got a couple dozen local business sponsors, but we're working with the city at their beautiful site to stage this free community jazz and arts festival.
And Hugh, I do have a clip from 2023, the 2023 festival at Mackenzie Hall. So I want to throw to this so people can understand what they'll hear, the vibe of the area. hear that performance, I just think about the hall itself. Could you talk just about the normal atmosphere of the performances? Talk about the acoustics of the space if you can.
Well, Mackenzie Hall has a very nice acoustic. We don't have to use hardly any PA at all. Wow. And with 200 seats in the hall, it's quite intimate. So that's a real great bonus. The fact they have that Yamaha piano is beautiful, too. By the way, you were just hearing on Hot Jazz Cello doing Mood Indigo. That was the great Mike Karub there. I want to point that out. And the park next door, the Mary E. Bibb Park, named in one of the pioneering black woman in our community that had the first, she and her husband had the first black-run newspaper. They've named this park in her honor, and it has a beautiful setting, lots of trees, and there's a big wooden gazebo, again, where we don't have to use much PA because the acoustics of it are beautiful. And I think that's one of the beauties of our festival. It's not one of these things where you have thousands of watts of amplified music. It's acoustic jazz, classic traditional jazz, and modern jazz, all the acoustic, real swinging stuff. And in both the park and the hall, they're great places to listen and to get comfortable.
And Hugh, just for those who are unaware of what the Sandwich community is or what it's like, I know once again you can look right at Detroit across the river from Sandwich. So can you just talk a little bit about the community and paint us a picture?
Yeah, well, Sandwich Town was, I think, one of the earliest communities formed west of the early communities in eastern Ontario. I think it dates to founding in about 1701 or thereabouts. So it's our oldest historic community, and there's still quite a few beautiful old buildings that go back at least to the 1800s there, including Mackenzie Hall. And it's been revitalized. The city last year put in new streets and the streetscaping, and it's a very lovely place. There's a lot of restaurants and pubs, and it's right there just a block from the Detroit River, and it's only 3.5 minutes from the bridge. You get over there and you come off the bridge, you're immediately getting into Old Sandwich. So it's one of our main historic districts of our city.
Yes, and Sandwich Town was actually established in 1797. So it's been there for a while. But I just want to bring us back to where we are right now, Hugh. So let's just talk a little bit about this year's event. Let's talk about this year's Port Windsor Jazz and Arts Festival. You expanded it and added a few more events as well. So you will have the music, of course, which everyone's going to go to hear the music. But you also have added poetry and dance. Why did you decide to expand a little bit?
Well, thanks to all the funding, thanks to all of our business sponsors, we had enough funds to hire about 55 musicians and 11 bands. And by the way, a couple of our Juno Award winners from Toronto, that's our Canadian equivalent of a Grammy, Reg Swagger, guitar, and also Kevin Turcotte, trumpet, are coming. So once we had this in place for all this music schedule, we thought, let's invite some of the other artists of our city. So we've got the poet laureate of Windsor, Peter Rastovic, and the great professional actress-playwright Leslie McCurdy, a great champion of arts, real pro in Windsor. She's going to perform poetry. We invited some visual artists. We also have a dance company, the A&H Dance Company, that has had award-winning, the Mayor's Arts Award, and also had work done with the Toronto Symphony and at the DIA. So in the hall, in addition to some music in the hall and all the music out in the park, we're going to have this professional caliber dance, our poets, and visual art set up, including by Dennis K. Smith, a wonderful artist who has come up with beautiful portraits taken from photos by Jeff Dunn, done in our series. So you'll see some paintings of performers, one of which is the great former Detroiter for 50 years, the great Charlie Gabriel, who went back 12 years ago and became the star of Preservation Hall Jazz Band. There's going to be a beautiful portrait of him and also of young Kassan Belgrave,
yes.
Who's become one of our favorite artists. I'll tell you, my connection there is that for 25 years, I was a great champion, and I'm happy to say a friend of Detroit's all-time patriarch of jazz, the late Marcus Belgrave.
Yes.
He and I worked on concerts, recordings, and tours together. I was fortunate to tour with him in his tribute to Louis Armstrong. And now here's his young son, who's one of the top jazz musicians in Detroit, Kassan Belgrave, and he's going to be a featured artist in our festival, along with some other very good Detroiters. We have the beautiful vocalist Shahida Narula. Shahida is our vocal instructor at the University of Windsor, but she's been really prominent for years on Detroit's jazz scene and recorded, toured with the late, great Jerry Allen.
So I'm so sorry to cut you off. We're at our last 30 seconds or so, but I do want to say thank you so much for joining us and spreading the knowledge about Windsor's rich jazz history, especially the Sandwich community, and what people can expect this upcoming weekend at the Port Windsor Jazz and Arts Festival. Hugh Leal organizes the Port Windsor Jazz and Arts Festival happening in Sandwich Town this Sunday, July 6th. This is an all-day event that is free. Hugh, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro on Canada Day.
Thank you, Tia.
Government funding comes and goes, but the voices of Detroit stay strong with your help. WDET is facing serious revenue challenges due to potential cuts being proposed in Washington. To keep this station thriving, we're turning to the real source of the power, you. Our goal, 1,000 additional members. So let's stand together. Join us right now at WDET.org/give and tell a friend. As well, the WNBA announced that Detroit and 2 other cities will be getting a WNBA team within the next 5 years. This would be the Motor City's second WDET team, previously the Detroit Shock. That team is now the Dallas Wings. In Detroit, the team won 3 championships and stayed in the top 5 in attendance for their last 6 seasons. The vice chairman of the Pistons Sports and Entertainment Division says the expansion will help Detroit grow. We're waiting to find out if the team will return as the Detroit Shock or if it will get a new name. Coming up, we're celebrating Canada Day, and you can't do that without talking pizza. That's right, Windsor Pizza. We'll find out a little bit more. That's next on the Metro. You all stay right there.